Profit and sustainability. You know, it's the off-the-pitch story that really never goes away. Many people, including the likes of FFP expert Stefan Borson, who's just joined us here in studio. Morning, Stefan. Everyone has been resolute in the belief that Chelsea would fall foul of financial rules and that they would breach. But do those still forecasting doom need to maybe think again? Some would say cute, some would say exploiting a loophole in the rules. It's now come to light in Chelsea's latest accounts. The owners have sold 2 Stamford Bridge hotels, and I've been in both, to a company that they also own at the price of 76.5 million quid to help bring them into line with profit and sustainability rules. They've sold hotels to themselves. Stefan Borson joins us live. Stefan, good morning. Did you see this coming? I'm not sure that you did. Have you been outsmarted by this?
Yeah, we've all been outsmarted. I mean, to an extent, of course. But look, you need to take a step back. I mean, the reality is that we spoke a number of months ago about the challenges that Chelsea had for 22-23. And I remember Simon thinking they'd just probably squeeze through, but the problems would compound over time such that probably in 23-24 they'd start to see an issue. It actually transpires that I was right and that they had a massive problem in 22-23 because when you remove both the hotel profit, and we'll talk about that in a moment, of course, when you remove that and also £17 million of recharged legal fees, and when you also remove £12.5 million of a mystery legal settlement paid to Chelsea, you actually find that they breached PSR, excluding those items, by £100 million, okay, in excess of, right? Now it is acceptable, it seems, that they would add back the 17, because it probably is actually to do with the purchase of the club, and therefore not really to be within Chelsea Holdings. And it is acceptable in an exceptional manner for them to have a £12.5 million settlement for something. We don't know what that is, but in the same way that you have exceptional costs that go against you from time to time, such as selling a manager, which they've often had as an exceptional costs. In fact, it's so common now that they don't actually put it as an exceptional, but they have had costs that are exceptional. And so it is fine to add those back. The more...
Is it okay to sell these 2 hotels to one of their own companies?
Well, look, we'll see. I mean, at the moment, it appears that they haven't actually had it approved by the Premier League. Now, this is obviously a moving story. The accounts that we saw on Saturday morning said that as of the end of December, when those accounts were signed off, they had not yet had approval by the Premier League of that transaction. They also stated that if the approval wasn't given, it would have a material impact on the accounts that they had published. And what they mean by a material impact, clearly, is that there is a very substantial possibility, a possibility of a very substantial adjustment being required to that 76 million. I would posit that they passed financial fair play in 22-23 only if they get the vast majority of that £76.5 million, such that if it is rejected by the Premier League after a process, and I've just got some timings on that in a moment, but if it is rejected, then they will fail 22-23 after all.
And then they'll appeal it.
Well, then I think we will possibly get into a different discussion as to it is possible that they go to an independent commission and say we disagree with the analysis of the Premier League in terms of the accounting and that we're right and the Premier League is wrong. But that does beg the question as to why the Premier League has opted to effectively charge Everton in respect of the capitalised interest, saying they have a certain view of the accounts and will test it out in an independent commission, but have not yet sought to charge Chelsea and say, we'll sort it out at an independent commission. So it seems to me that there is a difference of approach. Now, what's very important in respect of this Chelsea situation is that under the 22-23 Premier League handbook rules, they were required either to get approval before the transaction was completed or within 48 hours of the execution of the transaction to send the details to the Premier League for approval. And then within 10 days, the Premier League were meant to tell them whether they approved it or not.
And they haven't done this.
Well, they certainly hadn't done it definitively within 6 months, because we know that from the accounts. And we understand that neither party at the moment is prepared to say whether it's been approved. So we may be in a situation where 9 months after a transaction that was meant to be approved within 10 days has not yet been approved. And this is a transaction that we know is material and that they themselves declare as being material.
Absolutely.
If it is adjusted.
Stefan, people are making up their own minds. There's Danny, one of the listeners, listening to you right now. Come on, guys. I'm listening to Stefan. We all know the Premier League will allow the sales of the hotels to go towards it. Chelsea are part of the Super Six. Simon, what do you think of the sale of the 2 hotels to another of Bullion and Bally's companies? Is it cute? Is it cheeky? Or is it taking the mick?
It's an asset that Chelsea have within their portfolio of assets. To me, it often amazes me if Manchester City knew what was coming, that they wouldn't have bought Manchester City in a different way, loaded it with a lot of assets, and then found themselves getting around some of the problems that they've inherited as a result of their desire to be successful. And that would perhaps be with the benefit of hindsight. I don't have a view on it. If it's fair market value, which would be the argument, if that property is worth, or those properties are worth £76 million, with due respect, then that's the argument. Now, whether it's being sold to a Bowley company, you will take the revenue streams out, so Chelsea going forward won't have the benefit of the revenue streams if those hotels are profitable. You're laughing.
Yeah, because they've been smart.
Yeah.
Because if you go to the hotel accounts, they've sold the asset
and kept the income streams.
Yeah, they've given themselves a management contract, so they don't even lose the income stream.
Well, clever accountancy.
Well, it is.
What is it?
And this is why I maintain the view that the private equity guys weren't going to be caught with their pants down, maybe in the instant and the immediate term. You know, Stefan was always going to be right. The challenge was going to be about if the lack of income was coming in as a result of failure to achieve on the pitch, and they weren't selling players, there's going to be challenges. But these boys aren't stupid.
They're not stupid. Stefan, is this within the spirit of the rules? Do they care if it is or not?
Well, it may be a bit more than the spirit of the rules. So there's 2 things. Simon's right. On the face of it, that all they need to do is prove fair market value. But this is a property transaction. We know how you prove fair market value in property transactions. It's really quite simple. They get a couple of valuations. This is very, very mainstream property. This is central London prime property. This is not difficult to value. So there's no question that they can get the pieces of paper that say on the face of it, it's fair market value.
Yeah.
Well, it's the 2 hotels at Stamford Bridge, right? The Millennium and the Clockthorpe.
Yeah. So let me ask Simon then. How come it's taken 9 months for them not to approve it on that basis?
Well, that's a $64 million question. And it's interesting to see why the Premier League aren't commenting on themselves, because, you know, there's ambiguity there. It's very easy to clear up. They were either asked, if the rule, as Stefan and Kieran Maguire and guys like this spend their times understanding very specific details. I don't spend my time in handbooks, right? But they do, and they get, and that's very important.
Is that giving you a pass with this answer?
No, it's not, because it's not my, that I had accountants, I had FDs, I didn't run the finance department myself. So here the thing is, if they are obligated to have gone and gotten the Premier League's permission to include, not to sell the property, they can do what they bloody well want, but to include it within their profit and sustainability reports, and they haven't done, and the Premier League didn't give it and didn't involve themselves in it, then they have a challenge on their hands. It'll be interesting to see how the Premier League get around their own rules, because to be obligated to give them permission and didn't do so, it's going to be interesting to see what arguments are advanced as to the reasons why.
You see, Stefan, I think if you're Wolves and you look at what Chelsea are doing here, selling 2 hotels essentially to themselves to get round FFP. Wolves had a fire sale of players, and Lopetegui didn't like it, and that's by and large why he left and moved on. So further down the line, are a club like Wolves not going to say, "Hang on, Mr. Premier League, how can you let this happen?"
I would suspect that possibly every one of the teams is on the phone to the Premier League right now.
Everyone.
Well, look, it's so obviously against the overall spirit of sustainability rules. It's not sustainability. There's no sustainability in a financial transaction that moves profit because you crystallise a gain over a number of years. There's no sustainability element at all. There's a profitability element, but it's only an accounting profitability. There are rules in law that prevent these sorts of transactions being put in place to enable the distribution of money out of a company. And the reason that they're put in place is to block what are effectively just accounting trickery to get around rules. Let me just tell you...
Or to prejudice shareholders.
Sorry?
Or to prejudice shareholders.
Well, to an extent, but you're talking about a situation where it would get very dull and technical. But let me just tell you what the rules now say about these sorts of transactions. Now, this is interesting because it didn't apply to 22-23, but the rules now give the Premier League the power to assess on a reasonable and honest basis whether transactions have genuine commercial rationale. And if they don't believe that those transactions have genuine commercial rationale, they are now able to charge a club with a breach of Rule B15. Now, people won't remember, but B15 was the rule around utmost good faith, which the Premier League, which the Independent Commission found Everton to have breached. It's a very serious breach, and it accounted for a number of points at the Everton First Independent Commission. It was overturned because it transpired that actually the Premier League hadn't even asked for a breach of Rule B15.
Right.
But it's a very serious matter.
And you think Chelsea might cop for this with the sale of the two hotels?
Well, this is the thing. Even if they get through 22-23, there's a big question as to what they do about 23-24, because I think, looking at the numbers, it now confirms that they're literally hundreds of millions short, and that their plan is probably another similar transaction around property assets or tangible assets, i.e. non-footballing assets, being sold intra-group to make up the gap in 22-23. Everything is now clear in terms of how they're going to be able to do it, 23-24. We were thinking, how can they possibly sell 100, 200 million pound of players? How can they get profit? Well, of course they don't need to, because what they're thinking about doing is selling off the rest of the property assets to themselves.
So time might show that they're still in big trouble with the Premier League, and they're still going to face severe sanctions for that.
Let's see. But it seems to me that it would be very easy for the Premier League and or Chelsea to confirm that the approval has now been given and that the transaction has now been completed, and therefore it's been done.
You must remember when we're looking at this, first of all, we have to look at what financial fair play is doing and what's happening in football, and this economic asphyxiation that's going on in football, and really what's happening that could be disadvantageous. Do not forget that about 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, Real Madrid sold their piece of wasteland next to their ground for 100 million quid in order for them to comply. It wasn't worth 100 million quid, but that's what they sold it for, in order to be able to comply with competing in the Champions League. So this is not something that hasn't been done before.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.